Welcome to Health System CIO's interview with Greg Sieg, Chief Information Security Officer with the University of Michigan Regional Health Network. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor-in-chief. Greg, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Anthony, for having me today.
All right, very good, Greg. You want to start off with a little bit of information about your organization and your role?
Yeah, organization. I'm part of the Michigan Medicine Health Network that consists of two health systems: the University of Michigan Health West and the University of Michigan Health Sparrow. Um, Within that role, I'm overseeing the cybersecurity functions for both of those systems. Um, and this is something that's come together in the last about year and a half here. Part of a merger and acquisition group that's come together with the hospital. So working on bringing services cybersecurity together. I work out of Michigan Medicine and function as bringing central services for cybersecurity to all three of the facilities, alongside a CISO at Michigan Medicine as well that I work with.
All right, very good. So, there's a lot going on there. I actually attended a conference and one of the sessions was on M&A and the unique challenges around cyber when you have a lot of M&A going, even discussing the pre-merger discussions, some of the considerations that can come up, and then it was very interesting. There was like three phases. It was before the merge, before the agreement to merge, and then you have the technical point at which the merger takes place, but before systems are really integrated. And then you have the integration when data now is flowing between, and theoretically a cyber incident could affect that affects one would affect the other. So it's kind of phases. Tell me a little bit about which entity you were with, because I assume you were with one of these entities. Now you have a merged organization. You're bringing together multiple cyber teams. You have that the phases I mentioned, which is before the merger, you have post-merger and pre-integration, then you have integration. Does that make sense? First of all, the way I've articulated it, does that make sense to how you think these things kind of evolve? And tell me where you are in this journey.
Yeah, definitely makes sense to me. We're in a unique area with this. So, I started at Michigan Medicine supporting University of Michigan Health West as the deputy CISO. That was a merger and acquisition that had happened several years before. But in that case, they were working in parallel. There was not a lot of the integration work that was happening. I was hired
Mm.
on to start the integration work. Shortly after I hired on, the acquisition of Sparrow took place, and with that, that really ramped up from the organization the need and the want to fully integrate the health systems at that point. The integration has been split because academic medicine is quite a bit different than community health medicine. So the regional health network is, basically the community hospitals, and then our medical center and Michigan Medicine proper have kind of stayed off on their own as well. But departments like mine are working across all three of them. So we're kind of in multiple phases. With West, we were kind of, I would say, three-quarters of the way through that journey, and then Sparrows come on, and now I'd say we're at the beginning stages of that journey, with that entity. And some of the rules of engagement have changed as well with that. Areas prior that were staying separate, now a lot of those departments have started to come together as well. Where that makes some unique challenges is you have a need and a want for communication across organizations quickly, and you've got large organizations, and you're trying to um, keep the security up. You're trying to make sure that you get the communications across, and you're essentially at that. Yeah, right now you're still kind of working with three IT entities right now,
Mhm.
even though they're starting to blend together. We're still in those early stages. So with that, comes a lot of ideas, a lot of, we can do it this way, quickly, we can do it this way, or, we need to slow down. So a lot of it's the communication between the teams, and making sure that everybody's staying on the same page, making sure that the CTOs and CIO, CDIO are getting the information they need. That we can keep moving in the right direction. Um, there's some great applications out there with cloud, with Microsoft and some of these others that make some of this easy. But with that, it's all new to the teams as well. So we're bringing in cloud services, making sure that we're getting the right training done on them, making sure that we're doing the right risk profiling, all that to make sure it's a smooth transition. But a lot of that takes some time. You've got one side sometimes wants to move a little faster than the other. And trying to kind of merge that together and blend that, and like I said, keeping that open line of communication, I think, is the key there.
All right, very good. In that session I mentioned to you that I listened to, one of the concepts was when you have two entities you're bringing together, you have there's one dynamic which is one entity is always acquiring the other. There is a buyer and there is a person an entity that's been bought. And there's a power dynamic there, of course, where the buyer has more control than the entity being bought. But there's also the dynamic of which entity, if you were to study how they're doing a particular thing, is doing it better, right? So you could have a dynamic where even though the buyer has more say, the entity being bought may have better controls or a better dynamic around a particular process, and an enlightened buyer would say, "Hey, we're going to do what they're doing. We're going to take on their practices." Does any of that resonate? Tell me your thoughts on that dynamic.
Yeah, I think especially early on, I think the very first thought is exactly the first that you mentioned there, which is the large entity is going to swallow up the other entity and kind of make it their own. There, I think, was a big push, and with the West acquisition early on was a very big push of allowing that entity to still continue on its own and benefit from working together with Michigan Medicine, but not being swallowed up and turned into Michigan Medicine. There was a very big emphasis on the culture there, and I've seen some of that with this M&A as well. That there was a lot of good pieces that were part of West and Sparrow, and when they brought them together into the region, there was a mixture of leadership from both organizations on those teams, and part of that was to help keep that collaboration going. Areas where there was good wins, let's keep that momentum and moving, rather than just coming in and saying, hey, we're bigger, we're going to move to this area. So I see a lot of that. In I would say at times that makes security a little bit harder, because rather than going in and saying we're just going to standardize on these tools, we're going in and we're looking at the tool sets, and there might be a tool set that we've really put into, we enjoy, but we start looking at a different tool set and saying, hey, there's an advantage to this tool set, and maybe we should really bring this one across. So now we're bringing a tool from potentially a smaller entity into the larger scale, or vice versa. Um, so there's pros and cons to it. I'm enjoying the method that we're taking with it. It gives us a little bit more autonomy, lets us kind of keep moving. We don't feel like we're just kind of ripping and replacing. But it definitely does make the job harder. It's
Mhm.
be much easier to take the tools that we know are tried and true, and we've got our security assessments completed on them, and just throw them out there.
Yeah, application rationalization is a huge initiative at many organizations, even outside of security, right? In general, it's very difficult, very hard to actually sort of remove an application when it's got users and people are emotionally tied to it and comfortable with it. That can be very difficult. So when you bring together cyber teams from multiple organizations into, theoretically into one entity, or you're all coming together, now you've got, as you mentioned, multiple sets of tools. So where, or maybe it's just a time thing, maybe there's a delay between when we come together, and we're not going to be rash. We're not going to start shutting things off. We need time to figure out where we have duplication and then standardize. I would imagine though, ultimately the goal is standardization, reduction of duplicative applications, and that type of thing. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm speaking specifically here from from the cyber side. There's always an advantage of getting rid of duplication and coming together on a single set. Makes training much easier, makes the workflows much easier. Um, but there is also what we're calling a do what makes sense approach. So we're not ripping things out just to rip them out right away. We're looking, like I said, we're reviewing those tools. We're looking at contracts and seeing, does it make sense to do it now? Does it make sense to
Mm.
push this one back a year, prioritize somewhere else? So we're doing a lot of jockeying, with those right now, to determine kind of where we need to focus on. Um, and we're looking at where our gaps are at, and saying, okay, where are our easy wins in the organization to help get us to a baseline across the board, across the three entities as well. So we're taking in, a lot of different factors from these applications to try to figure out, what is that best path forward, that might be unique to us within that situation.
Very good. I would imagine though you want to be very intentional about this, meaning even if we don't want to get rid of things now, we want to know what we have. So we need an inventory, right? We need an inventory and we need to understand, you mentioned contract renewals. We may decide to let something renew, but we don't want things renewing without knowing about it if it's some sort of auto renew process, right? So tell me about that kind of thing and maybe the idea of gaining an inventory as being very important.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we did is we started pulling contracts, specifically looking at time frame, auto renew clauses, what potential opt out clauses would be, to kind of get an assessment of that, because if even if there was an application that, let's say we decided we were going to move on from, we wanted to know where we stood, what made the best sense for that, because if we just signed a 3-year contract somewhere and that's the one we want to start with, it might make sense to go somewhere that we're getting close to the end of the contract, especially if it's an application that's working and doing what it needs to be done. As you said, the inventory, that was another big piece. Probably one of the first things we did, even before, I'd say probably even before contracts, our first conversations were, what are you utilizing for these tools? And we started building out crosswalks, across the tools, determining kind of where we were. I think we came, I'd say a little lucky in some of these cases where a lot of our major security tools, were aligned already,
Hmm.
which, that definitely helps. So in those cases, you're looking at contracts and seeing how you can start aligning those contracts just to make those easier. But it makes it where you're not doing a complete rip and replace, or trying to learn a new product for a time period or whatnot.
Very good. Let's talk about this idea of when the merger is finalized, legally speaking, day one, minute one, um, the acquiring entity has a whole you have a well, once you do some integration, you have a whole new risk profile. But I guess even when the contract is signed and the agreement's finalized and it takes effect, the acquiring organization has a different risk profile because you are the owner now of that other hospital or health system. Is there some kind of concept of emergency, not emergency, but like right away, day one, what are the red flags? We talk about the things that present clear and present danger. The idea of a known exploited vulnerability exposed to the internet, right? That can happen. It's being exploited, exposed. So in your organization, when you're in control, we don't let that happen. If as soon as we're where it's immediately patched or whatever, you don't know what's going on at the entity you've just acquired till you take a look. You can't really take a look before the acquisition is done. It's a long way of saying is there something that happens on day one of, we need to make sure as soon as possible that A, B, C, and D is taken care of, and we're head down focused on that to make sure there's no fires, there's no huge vulnerabilities, something like that?
Yeah, to your point there, in the pre-work, there's limited things that you can dig into. So, you're not able to break into every application, into logs, into configurations. So there's very limited information that you have. And during that signing period, there's really very limited discussion that can be done during that period until essentially the ink's dried.
Mhm.
So definitely day one, that's where the risk comes on. You don't have time to go and say, oh, hold up, we don't like this process over here, and this firewall is open. um with that, I think, from our standpoint, again, one of those, in the situations that we've been in, it's been, they've been a good transition over. Was very happy with what we came into from that perspective. So that makes it much easier. I know that that doesn't happen, with all acquisitions. Um, but that day one, you're going through, you're kind of looking at the big pieces. Double checking your scanning, double checking, your systems. A lot of discussions day one with the other security team. Um, what are their biggest risks, biggest fears, within
Mhm.
their system?
Right.
And you're doing this with a you're just getting to know these people. Many
Right.
times this is your first conversation with them, so you haven't really essentially broken the ice yet.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of especially from the other side, there's a lot of unknowns within these discussions. So to me, that's where I'll continue to reiterate the communication. Having that open dialogue. Being very transparent with where you're at, where you're moving. With our situation, the way that Michigan Medicine did the acquisitions, it made it very easy for us to be, hey, this is how we're moving forward with things. It was a very transparent, you know, method, in my
Mhm.
perspective.
Right.
So I think that's helpful.
Mhm.
But I think that's going to be, the goal, in my opinion, of if I had to do this again, would be making sure that we just stay in front of the communications, on day one, and that's communication not just with leadership, but with the frontline staff as well, that are working these areas, and making sure we're getting in front of them right away to start building that trust, building that work stream.
All right, very good. Before we move on from that topic, anything else around M&A? I think this is really big. It's a big issue in healthcare. There's a lot of M&A going on. And cybersecurity, of course, is paramount, the importance. Any other advice you would give to someone around M&A?
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate the communication. Just making sure that you're looking at things and you're keeping an open lines of communication. I think that's it's worked well for us, and I think it's a big piece of it.
All right, very good. What else is on your mind outside of the M&A stuff? What other either kind of trends or technologies? You mentioned cloud. I don't know if you want to discuss that, but sort of top of mind for you.
Yeah, there's a couple that I'd say come to mind. I mean, the easy one right now is artificial intelligence. That's kind of hitting everything, and I would say um, really isn't going off the radar at all. But with that, that's one that we're continuing to watch. We're seeing from our threat intelligence, we're seeing a lot of phishing tactics getting better with that. But on the flip side, we're seeing a lot of growth in the security products as well with it.
Mhm.
So there's kind of been a trade off with that right now. Um, what I'm kind of interested in is keeping an eye on and seeing, at some point, does that line start skewing where the trade off goes better for the bad actors or better for the security tools?
Mhm.
I don't think there's been a clear win, with that just yet. But that's definitely one that's sitting there. With that as well, usage of AI that starts getting into your compliance, your governance pieces. But that's one that we're trying to have a feel of allowing usage of it, but let's do training, make sure that we're doing it securely, make sure that people understand where they can and can't put data, and moving in those right directions. Um, the other piece you mentioned cloud there. Um, you know, we're on that pendulum swing right now of moving everything out of the data center still into the cloud. It hasn't started to swing back yet. I'm kind of waiting for that. But as we continue until that pendulum does swing, we'll continue moving that route. My big area with that is identity. I see a lot of gaps in identity right now, especially with the cloud. There's a lot of visibility issues. When it comes to cloud, it's very easy for a department to pick up a credit card, make a purchase, and they have a cloud service now. And everything's done. So really kind of looking at that, and again a lot of it comes down to education, awareness, making sure people know that when they're utilizing the systems, they've got to be alerting the correct people, making sure the right contracting is being done. um, with that, the other one that really more recently has been kind of on my radar is machine identity. And what I'm seeing from that space, and I think a lot of this has to do with the artificial intelligence, is you're seeing an uptick in ransomware and in exploits of identities, because it's a lot easier to do at this point. And more recently, you're seeing an uptick in going after machine accounts because they're privileged accounts. They've got access to our high-end servers, and many times these accounts do not have passwords that are regularly reset. They don't have MFA, sitting on them because of the type of account they are. So they're a little bit more ripe for the picking at this point. So that's something that I've been watching a lot lately, trying to determine, what the best methods are, what's the best way, with PAM access of how we can, better protect those accounts. And I see that in the next year still, continuing to kind of creep up on the radar.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the cloud pendulum. You said you don't see it swinging back yet, but I would tell you that I do in terms of the discussions I've had with people. And we're actually, because of certain things I've been told, I'm putting together a webinar on this for January. Um, and I have expressly been told that the cloud people, the individual I'm talking about, and I'm sure he's representing other people, is got a lot of concerns. He's got a lot of concerns with the cloud, and um, is just getting a little uncomfortable. And I think the way he expressed it was, it's a lack of control. It feels like things are out of my control that used to be in my control, and it makes him uncomfortable. And so we're gonna have a discussion about that. So I would say that maybe there's more going on with the pendulum than you think. The reason you expressed it, it sounds like, is because you can understand an IT executive, a CIO or a CISO saying, "I don't know. I don't know if I'm comfortable with everything out there. Tell me your thoughts."
Yeah, and it's hard to say on future where everything's going to go. Um, I feel the pendulum's up there. I feel that it's close. I've not really seen the swing starting to come back just yet.
Mhm.
I have heard some of the concerns. I will say I have some of those concerns.
Mhm.
Um, there's a big difference in the training requirements. If a mistake is made in an on-prem service, you typically have a firewall or other items that kind of protect that from being ripe for the picking. In the cloud, you don't have that luxury, and I think that's where a lot of that concern comes from. Um, there's also the cloud products. They're changing. They're changing very rapidly. So you go and you make a change, and Microsoft or another vendor comes out, they make an update, and now that setting that you adjusted is different, or it's named differently. And that causes confusion, causes some concern for where did that go, because this update came through, and the updates aren't as visible as they are with an on-prem service. You have to really be kind of keeping track of that, and looking through them a lot closer. um, I still though see a lot of push, and from CIOs in general right now of the speed that the cloud offers. I see that with AI as well. That the time to service is much sooner on a lot of these products. They're a lot easier to obtain. So that's where I just don't personally see the shift coming back just yet. I will say I would be very happy to be wrong on this and see that shift come back. Because I do think that it's definitely easier to secure something that's more tangible, more in front of you. But it definitely, from my perspective, I'm still looking at training and ways that I can better enhance my cloud skills and stay kind of in that direction, that path.
Yeah, because I think the concern is it's fairly complex. It's a unique skill set. You may be working with multiple vendors, Microsoft, Google, uh, the three big vendors. Um, so it's complicated. And is the concern that you could have a misconfiguration that'll mean there's a security vulnerability?
Yeah, and to your point of the complication, it's very complex but very easy on the same side. And what I mean by that is that it is a complex system, but it's very easy for an administrator to go in and click a button and make
Mm-hmm.
a change that has massive implications.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas typically on an on-prem service, that change would have to be accompanied by a firewall request, by some type of other request to allow that to work. So while cloud can be very complex, it can also have some very simple things that cause complex issues,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
with it. And I think that's where a lot of that comes in. And it's a completely different shift to the administrators that have utilized on-prem products for years. Um, we've got to get that training bubble, kind of caught up. It's moving so fast that I don't feel that the training has caught up with it yet.
Mm. Yeah, and I've also heard there's some cost issues out there with when you have you're charged, I guess, by how much data you have up there and also how much you're accessing it and moving it back and forth. And so with AI, I believe the term is you could have a lot of cycles, meaning that you could be hitting that data up in the cloud a lot and racking up some costs that you didn't anticipate. It's one thing to park it up there and leave it, but it's a different cost proposition if you're interacting with it. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, that definitely sounds accurate. With when it goes to the cost, I do think that is definitely an area that you're seeing the pendulum come back on. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is, um, for years we were told move to the cloud. It's cost neutral or even a savings.
Mhm.
And I think the realizations finally hit that there really was not a savings there. The FTEs that you saved by moving a product out still stayed on. They just did
Mhm.
other tasks. So I think you're starting to see that realization that the cloud isn't necessarily cheaper than other services. But like I said, I still think the win out there is the speed. That the cloud that it provides you.
Provisioning.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
provisioning abilities that you get with it. Much easier to go turn something on. Externally, it's a flip of the switch, and you can be up and running with a service. Within a matter of hours typically. So
Very good. The machine identity you mentioned, quite interesting. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about too much. We talk about identity with people a lot, and making sure people are credentialed properly, don't have more access than they should, and that kind of thing. But the machine identity is definitely something interesting. One of the other things that's come up in recent interviews is the vulnerabilities to operational technology, how that's a completely different animal, requires a different skill set than sort of normal IT cybersecurity. But it's something that we were, I was talking to someone about this. We described it as sort of that room in the basement, that dusty room in the basement that no one really wants to go in, but you'd better go in there because you may have some vulnerabilities there. And if somebody gets a hold of your heating system, your air conditioning, your elevators, and wants to mess around, that could be a bad situation. Any thoughts on that before I let you go?
yeah, in that space, it doesn't seem that new to me from a standpoint of in healthcare we've got medical devices.
Mhm.
So I feel like we've already kind of been in that space where we're dealing with these odd devices that don't have the same connection types as computers and whatnot. So a lot of that has been, finding ways of micro segmentation,
Mhm.
different network strategies. Because a lot of these devices are very similar. You can't put antivirus on them. You can't hit them with a um, vulnerability scanner. With an active scanner, you've got to use a lot of passive scanning. So a lot of similarities there. And I think healthcare has been dealing with that for years now. So we look at ways to segment, ways to mitigate there. There's a lot of tools out there that are helping identify these items, but as you said, the amount of these items is growing exponentially. In a new healthcare or even a new building, in general, not only you're going to have the heating systems, you're going to have lighting controls, you're going to have a lot of your plug access at this point is being run off of these. So, as they continue to build these smart buildings, we're going to have thousands of these devices that are sitting out there, and typically, they're not built for security.
Mhm.
So finding ways to keep them protected, and in many cases these systems don't need to have a lot of external communication to them as well. I
Okay.
think that's a misconsumption. Folks will try to just give them access so they can do updates to them, but locking them down and looking at those routes is probably the best way to do it.
All right, Greg, we're just about out of time. Any final thoughts, piece of advice? I know you were promoted recently. You're doing well. You had mergers, and you've come out in a pretty good spot. So, what's your secret to success? Any advice for your colleagues there on what's helped you move ahead in this field?
Yeah, I think it comes down to doing what you like. I've worked myself from um, started in healthcare in help desk, worked my way up through multiple different roles. Even get into some of the emergency management side and some other aspects of the hospital as well. But security's always been a passion of mine, helping people from that perspective, and I think that makes it very easy as you're kind of working your way up. If you have something that a goal that you're looking forward to, that's the best route. So I'd say just find something that you like and work towards that passion.
Awesome, Greg. That was wonderful. I think readers are really going to enjoy it, and I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Anthony.